to government class. In today's government class, we'll be looking at the factors that led to the rise and growth of nationalism in Nigeria, and we'll be focusing on the internal factors. The first is the discrimination against Africans. The colonial administrators discriminated against Africans in the civil service. There was also racial discrimination. The Europeans in the civil service, they lived in reserved areas such as the European quarters, or what we call the government residential areas, and they had provision of portable water supply and electricity, while their African counterparts lived in the ghettos. So one of the factors that led to the rise and growth of nationalism in Nigeria, the internal factors that led to the rise and growth of nationalism in Nigeria, was the discrimination against Africans. The colonial masters, they discriminated against the Africans in the civil service, while the Europeans in the civil service were given quarters in the government residential areas, and they were given provision of water supply and electricity. Their African counterparts lived in the ghetto, and this was one of the reasons that led to the rise and growth of nationalism in Nigeria. The Africans also wanted equal advantages with the Europeans in the civil service. They wanted equal opportunities in the civil service. They wanted higher positions in their legislative and executive councils, and they wanted to have a say concerning their affairs. Another internal factor that led to the rise and growth of nationalism in Nigeria was the formation of political parties. The Nigerian Youth Movement, the NNDP, the NCNC, and etc. When these parties were formed, they played leading roles in the growth of nationalism in Nigeria. So the formation of political parties also led to the rise and growth of nationalism in Nigeria, because these political parties, they played leading roles in the growth of nationalism in Nigeria. Another internal factor that led to the rise and growth of nationalism in Nigeria is the influence of Christianity and the establishment of schools. The influence of Christianity and establishment of schools made the nationalists to realize that, after all, men are created equal by God. God did not create some higher than the others, though we have social segmentations in our societies, but they found out that all men are created equal by God. So the influence of Christianity and the establishment of schools also led to the rise and growth of nationalism in Nigeria. Another internal factor that led to the rise and growth of nationalism in Nigeria was the return of the ex-servicemen. So some Africans fought alongside Britain during the Second World War, and the jobs that were promised to them upon their return after the war was not given to them. So that was another reason that led to the rise, and that was one of the internal factors that led to the rise and growth of nationalism in Nigeria. The fact that these people, they fought alongside Britain in the Second World War. They fought alongside Britain, and then the jobs that the British promised to give them on their return from this war, on their return to West Africa from the war, was not given to them. So it was one of the factors that led to the rise and growth of nationalism in Nigeria. Another factor that led to the rise and growth internal factor that led to the rise and growth of nationalism in Nigeria was the activity of educated people such as Nnamdi Azikiwe, H.O. Davies, Abat Macaulay, Obafemi Awolowo, Kwame Nkrumah, etc. The activities of these educated people, such as Nnamdi Azikiwe, H.O. Davies, Abat Macaulay, Obafemi Awolowo, Kwame Nkrumah, etc., and many more of them, mobilized the masses for support during the struggle for independence. Another internal factor that led to the rise and growth of nationalism in Nigeria was the introduction of the elective principle in 1922. This principle only favored the people in Lagos and Calabar. A majority of Nigerians were disenfranchised, and this provoked the growth of nationalism in Nigeria. So the introduction of the elective principle in 1922 was such that only qualified people in Lagos and Calabar could vote, and majority of Nigerians were disenfranchised. They could not vote. And so because of the introduction of this new elective principle, it angered people so much that they decided to fight for nationalism in Nigeria. Another internal factor that led to the rise and growth of nationalism in Nigeria is the activities of trade unions. So some of the trade unions, such as the Rail Workers Union, led by Michael Imodu and others, became militant, and they used strikes to demand strikes to back their demands for better conditions of service. So another factor that led to the rise and growth of nationalism in Nigeria was the activities of trade unions. Some trade unions, such as the Railway Workers Union, they went on strikes to demand better conditions of service, and this equally supported the activities of the nationalist leaders in their struggle against colonial rule. Another internal factor that led to the rise and growth of nationalism in Nigeria was the establishment of newspapers. Newspapers such as the West African Pilot, the Lagos Daily News, and many more, they played vital roles in the decolonization process. So the establishment of newspapers also played a vital role in the rise and growth of nationalism in Nigeria, because these people, they wrote against the activities of their colonial masters. They criticized the government of the colonial masters, and all this, newspapers was given to people to read, and this brought about the rise and growth of nationalism in Nigeria.